Chapter 27 of The Clue of the New Pin by Edgar Wallace. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Yoganand. The Clue of the New Pin. Chapter 27. He leapt to his feet. "What?" he gasped. "I killed Jessie Trasmia," she repeated. "Not directly with my own hands, but I'm responsible for his death, almost as assuredly as if I had shot him." She caught his hand and held it. "How white you are! I was a brute to put it that way. In our profession we love these dramatic—" "No, I don't mean that, Tab." "Will you tell me what you do mean?" She signaled him to sit on the footrest of the chair. "I'll tell you something, but I don't think I'll tell you any more about the murder," she said. "And this is the something which you ought to know, and which I intend you should know. I had not the slightest intention of saying what I did. The spirit of tragedy seems to haunt me," she said, staring straight ahead. "I was cradled in that atmosphere of violence and wickedness. I once told you, Tab, that I had been in service as a tweeny maid, and I think you were startled. I went there from a public orphans' home, an institution where little children are taught to be born old. Tab, my mother was murdered. My father was hanged for a murder." There was no pain in her eyes, just a little hardness. He took both her hands in his and held them. "I don't remember anything about it," she went on. "My earliest recollections was the long dormitory where about 40 little girls used to sleep, a very fat matron and 2 iron-faced nurses, and the why and wherefore of my being at Parkington's institution only came to me late in life. One of the little girls had heard the matron tell the nurse, and I had to piece together the fact that I was an orphan by the act of my father, and that after his trial and execution I had been sent to this home to be brought up and educated for the profession which all good little girls follow, and which had as its supreme reward an appointment as undercook. I was not so fortunate. I'm afraid my cooking was rather vile, for when I came out of the institute it was to take a place as under housemaid and general help in the kitchen of a great society leader, who spent thousands of pounds upon charity, but weighed the very bread that her servants ate. I had only been in this place for 3 months when Mr. Trasmia made his appearance. It was on a cold, windy afternoon. I remember it as distinctly as though it were yesterday, when one of the parlour maids came and said I was to go up into the drawing room. I found Mr. Trasmia alone, and I was rather frightened at the sight of him, for he did not speak, but sat with a little scowl on his face, taking me in from head to foot. I was between 12 and 13 then, a sensitive child, to whom life as it came to me was a veritable hell. He asked me what my age was, and whether I was happy, and I told him the truth. Apparently he had seen the authorities of the institute, for I was allowed to go away with him, and he took me to a poor apartment house and placed me under the care of a woman who either owned or rented the house, and sublet the rooms furnished to the queerest lot of people I've ever seen congregated under one roof. Knowing him now much better, I am inclined to think that Mr. Trasmia owned the house himself, and that the woman was his nominee. I did not see him again for nearly 2 months. I had a room to myself, and he sent me school books to read and study, and it was whilst I was here that I first met Yearling, who, as I have told you, was a poor waiter at a Chinese restaurant. At the end of the 2 months, Mr. Trasmia came for me, and his coming was heralded by the arrival of a huge box of clothes, the likes of which I had never seen, let alone worn. He left a message that I should be dressed and ready to go with him, and that afternoon he called and took me down into the country to a preparatory school, which after the institute was a heaven upon earth. On the way down he told me he had heard about me from some friends of his, and he wanted to give me an education which would fit me to take the position which he had for me, and I was so overcome by his kindness that I cried all the way to our destination. The 3 years that I spent at St. Helens seem even now like a beautiful dream. I was happy. I made many friends, and my whole outlook on life changed. The year I left, Mr. Trasmia came down to a commemoration and saw me acting in a play which the School Dramatic Society had produced, and from what he saw was evolved this extraordinary arrangement. Knowing what I do, I know he was not wholly disinterested. It was his practice to take up projects and finance likely people. Once he had told me that he had intended settling in this country and living the life of a gentleman, to use his own words, but that he was so unutterably bored that to give himself an interest he took up the most extraordinary of schemes. Do you know, at one time he financed 12 tea rooms and collected a share of takings every day? Do you know that he was behind 3 doctors and took his profits from each? He was Yearling's backer, and in time he came to be mine. I was with him 6 months, acting as his secretary in a tiny office he hired for the purpose, and to which he never came until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Then it was that he suggested that I should go on to the stage, and sent me away with a touring company. Of course he was financially interested in it, and it was my duty to send him a daily return showing the amount of money we took every night. On Saturdays I paid the salaries and expenses, and remitted the remainder to him. When the tour was finished, I came back to town to find that he had already made arrangements in his furtive, secretive way to start a season with me as the principal attraction. My salary! You would laugh if I told you. It was hardly enough to keep body and soul together. Only as an excuse for his parsimony, I agreed that he would pay me 1/2 of the profits over a certain amount. To my astonishment, as well as to his, I became not only a respectable success, but a great financial success. The profits on my seasons were enormous. They exceeded to an incredible extent the amount he had fixed. And of course he paid. Jessie trusts me, his word was more than his bond. It was his oath. His code was the code of the Chinese businessman. When you know what that means, Tab, you will realize how very punctilious he was in such matters. He made exactly the same arrangements with Yearling. There was the curious bond which bound us together, Yearling and I. Our shares were enormously in excess of his estimate, but he paid loyally. Between him and me there was never an agreement of any kind. In the case of Yearling there was an agreement, as you know, but the most bizarre aspect of my success was that I was compelled to continue as a secretary. Every night when the theatre was closed, I motored to his house, dealt with his correspondence, and answered his letters. Sometimes I was so weary after a heavy evening that I could scarcely drag myself up the steps of Mayfield. But Jessie was inexorable. He never let upon any bargain he made, any more than he evaded the terms of any agreement which proved adverse to him. When I began to get talked about, he insisted upon my making a show, as he called it, and brought a lot of jewels, which he told me should be mine at his death. Whether he bought them, they did not look new to me, or whether he acquired them in one of those deals of which nobody knew anything about, I am unable to say with certainty. They were beautiful, but they were not mine until his death. Every night I dined with him at Yearling's, and he handed to me the jewel case which he had taken from his bag, and every night I carried those jewels back to the house and gave them into his care. Did the old man ever tell you how he came to seek you out? She nodded, and a faint smile came and went. Jessie, trust me, was very frank. That was one of his charms. He told me he knew my deplorable history, and he wanted somebody about whom he knew a few discreditable facts. He said that in almost those identical words. "You'll have to go along as I want you," he said, "and the higher you get, and the more successful you become, the less you will want the news published that your father was a murderer." And yet, curiously enough, he never objected to my taking my own name, for Artfun is my name for professional purposes. I don't suppose anybody at that dingy institute associates me with the skinny little girl who used to scrub and peel and toil at uninterested lessons from morning until night. "What about your father?" asked Tab with an effort, for he expected that any reference to her parents must still wound her. To his surprise, she answered readily. "He was an actor," she said, "and I think he was a clever actor until he took to drink. It was in drink that he murdered my mother. That much I learnt at home. I have not troubled to enquire since. What are you thinking about, Tab?" His forehead was knit. "I am trying to recall the execution of any person named Artfun in the last 20 years. I know them all by name," he said slowly. "Have you a telephone?" She nodded. In 3 minutes Tab was talking to the news editor of the Megaphone. "Jacques," he said, "I want some information. Do you remember any person named Artfun being executed for murder in the last," he looked round at the girl, "17 or 18 years?" "No," was the instant reply. "There was a man named Artfun against whom a coroner's verdict of manslaughter was returned, but he skipped the country." "What was his first name?" asked Tab eagerly. "I'm not sure that it was Francis or Robert. No, it was Willard Artfun. I remember there were 2 Arts in it," said the Information Bureau. "In what town was this crime committed?" Jacques answered without hesitation, giving the name of a small country town that Tab knew well. He hung up the receiver and turned to the girl. "What was your father's name?" he asked. "Willard," she replied without hesitation. "Phew!" whistled Tab and wiped his streaming forehead. "Your father was not hanged." He saw her go red and white. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Perfectly sure. Old Jacques never makes a mistake. Besides which, he had the name pat when I asked him. Willard Artfun. He was indicted for manslaughter. I fear that your unhappy mother died of his violence, but Willard Artford himself left the country and was never arrested or tried. His arm went round her in support. She had gone suddenly white and ill-looking. Thank God, she whispered. That seemed worse than killing my poor mother. Oh, Tab, it has been such a nightmare to me, such a dreadful, dreadful weight. You can't know how I felt about it. Was it that? He hesitated. Something I had said that made you feel bad when we talked of Mr. Trasmere's will? She looked at him steadily, but did not give an answer. I used to hate this nightly borrowing of jewels. She went back to her relations with Jessie Trasmere. I had enough money to buy my own, though I have no particular leaning toward jewellery. But old Trasmere would not hear of it. Any movement towards my independence? He checked ruthlessly. She stopped suddenly, and her mouth made a little O of surprise. I wonder if he heard in China? She asked. Yes, that's it. He must have met my father. That's how he came to know about me. I'm sure Yearling knows, because Mr. Trasmere had a habit of making elaborate notes. I wonder, she said, speaking to herself. Impulsively she threw out her hands and caught his. Tap, the night you came into my dressing room, I felt instinctively that you were a factor in my life. I could never have dreamt how big a part you were going to be. For once in his life, Tap could not think of an appropriate rejoinder. The end of chapter 27.